Welcome, and thanks for joining me on this intrepid journey as we explore and uncover mysterious and elusive tales of some of the world's most famous, lost and forgotten treasures. There's something about treasure and the act of seeking it that has intrigued humanity since time began, from ancient rituals to buried pirate treasure to hoards of fascinating and mystical artifacts acquired through war and brutal conquests, through to tracing our history in order to understand our past. I have long been fascinated by treasure and the journeys in which humanity has long embarked on in order to acquire it. The search for historical clues, precious materials, and immense knowledge. But for me, it's more about the immersive stories than the riches and power sought out by the explorers who seek such treasures. Because, for the majority, it's only the stories, myths, and legends that in the end remain, while the rest is lost to history. And in some way, it's fascinating in itself, as it opens the doors for further stories to be retold. So you see, the real treasures are the stories themselves. In this episode, we'll be exploring and unveiling a rich and captivating story, one that has long been in the folds of history books and known by many as Custer's Last Stand. And on that final note, let's embark on this cryptic and elusive story together. The Treasure of Little Bighorn. In the majority of cases throughout history, it is almost with certainty that treasures are a consequence or product closely associated with wars. And the treasure of Little Bighorn is certainly no exception to that rule. And while it's not a hoard that is famous for its colossal value, it is nonetheless a treasure, which had been removed from its caretakers, quite literally, and in the case of the treasure of Little Bighorn, many of its caretakers. Now, should you be fortunate enough to have been educated on the history of the United States, you will almost certainly have learned of the Battle of Little Bighorn, also famously referred to as Custer's Last Stand, alternatively known to the Lakota Native Americans and other Plains Indians as the Battle of Greasy Grass, both of which are in reference to a bloody conflict which commenced in late June of 1876 within the boundaries of the Crow Reservation. Said to be the most significant act of the Great Sioux War, a conflict that originated during 1868, where the Treaty of Fort Laramie granted the Lakota Native Americans protection of their sacred lands, a region known as the Black Hills, an area that spanned from North Dakota through to Montana. Though it was the second attempt at establishing the treaty after the first failed attempt from 1851, also known at the time as the Horse Creek Treaty. Now, several years after the renewed treaty was initiated in early July of 1874, it was during this time that Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer was commissioned by the U.S. Army to the area on a scouting expedition to seek out a feasible route to the southwest, as well to explore for fitting locations of a fort. However, while Custer was engaged in his search, the expedition focus pivoted upon the discovery of gold deposits by the accompanying civilian prospectors. Deposits containing enough gold to spawn a new gold rush, which consequently later led to the gold rush of the Black Hills, making way to the birth of the once lawless town of Deadwood, a story also depicted in a popular TV series which premiered on HBO Premium in March 2004. Beyond Custer's reporting back of the valuable discoveries, in a letter forwarded on August 15th of 1874 to the Assistant Adjutant General of the Department of Dakota, stating that there is no doubt as to the existence of various metals throughout the hills, and that examinations at numerous points confirm and strengthen the fact of the existence of gold in the Black Hills. As such, the events that unfolded were just the beginning of what was fast approaching, the impending gold rush to Black Hills, an event of which greatly angered the Native American tribes, marking the beginning of the conflict to come. At which point, the US government, who as part of the treaty held authority to punish white settlers and tribe members who committed crimes against the tribes, Initially honouring the declaration of the established treaty, the US government set in motion attempts to evict the gold prospectors from the Black Hills region. However, these attempts at eviction ultimately failed, and the retaliation which ensued saw the Lakota Native people unite with the Cheyenne, the Sioux, and other native tribes, who came together to revolt against the encroachment on and loss of their prized and sacred territory. Now, as earlier mentioned, in 1876, General Custer, the 7th Cavalry, and his regiment battalion of men were immediately dispatched to put an end to the imminent Native American uprising, where the unthinkable happened. Prior to dispatching the men into battle, each man received to the sum of 4 months' back pay, distributed out to each individual in the form of gold, silver, and paper currency, the estimated total value of which is said to have been around $25,000 at the time, of which today in 2023 would be worth approximately $702,900, which, by all accounts, is not exactly an enormous hoard. Nonetheless, it would still claim its place in history as a legendary treasure. Despite the long-awaited payout, the men with certain pride carried their remuneration on their person, stuffing their belated payout into pockets, pouches, and satchels before descending onto the inevitable battlefield, where, unfortunately, the regiment endured a massive blowing defeat by bloody massacre, at the mercy of the combined Native American forces, which greatly outnumbered their own. Preceding the overwhelming victory of the Native Americans on the battlefront and during the aftermath of the Great Skirmish, the very moment which marked the beginning of the heist of the treasure of Little Bighorn, where the Native American warriors stripped the deceased US soldiers of all their clothing, personal possessions, and their recently acquired gold, silver, and paper currency. It's believed that this entire hoard of looted treasure and possessions was then gathered together and placed into a large leather-hide saddlebag and dispatched to a secret unknown location, where the cash was stashed away, hidden far from anyone who may come in search of it. And thus it was branded. And so the treasure of Little Bighorn was conceived. Along with the treasure of the Battle of Little Bighorn, there is another treasure that closely links to the story. And while the Battle of Little Bighorn raged on, a military supply boat coined the Far West, captained by Grant Marsh, was maneuvering down the Bighorn River in an attempt to transport reinforcements and much-needed supplies to General Custer's front lines. At some point, Marsh gained early insight of the occurring bloody massacre, and with that, he quickly realized that his mission had now become one of a rescue endeavor. However, on board the vessel, Marsh was carrying a precious cargo of gold bars, amounting to $375,000 at the time, by whom he was securing for a group of miners who were concerned of potential attacks by Sioux Indians, and rightly so. As such, his vessel was encumbered with the vast weight of the precious cargo, and as he began boarding the 51 fortunate yet injured survivors from the battle, it only added additional weight to the mass already on board. Therefore, Captain Marsh was forced to evict some of his precious cargo, to accommodate carrying the soldiers to asylum, and in order to prevent the vessel from sinking. It is presumed that Captain Marsh had buried the precious cargo of gold bars along the shores of the Bighorn River, only to later discover, during an expedition to reacquire the buried gold hoard, that it had been submerged far from any recovery attempts by an unforeseen mudslide. It is still believed that to this day, the gold remains buried deep within the landscape, near the site of the battle. However, as the land is now considered a national monument, no further attempts to excavate have taken place, leaving the precious cargo to remain a mystery lost to the riverbanks. Back to retracing the steps of Custer's loot, captured at the Battle of Little Bighorn, now hidden in a secret location. It is told that the Cheyenne chieftain going by the name of 2 Moons informed a white Indian trader who went by the name of Walker Peyton Moncure, who owned a trading post in Busby, Montana, where the two became friends. 2 Moons informed Moncure as to the whereabouts of the heisted Little Bighorn battlefield treasure, even going as far as to provide him with artifacts from the bloody battle, as well as giving him a manila envelope, which contained a map he drew of the treasure's concealed location, a secret that Moncure would ultimately take with him until his death in June of 1964, where at the age of 88, while making repairs to his home's roof, he took a fall resulting in a hip injury, of which he fell victim to the complications of. As it turns out, Moncure reburied the body of his close friend in a mausoleum in 1936, where 20 years later, with permission of the Cayenne Native Americans, a reporter by the name of Catherine Wright would conduct an investigation at the reburial site of Two Moons. It was there she discovered a hidden vault, which was located underneath a bronze plaque. Within the vault, she discovered a mysterious manila envelope, the very one which had been presented to Moncure along with the spoken-of artifacts. With the envelope, a typed message, which read in part, "Hiding place and location of money and trinkets taken from dead soldiers on Custer battlefield." The message also declared that the mysterious envelope was not to be opened until June 25th of 1986, 110 years after Custer's last stand, and 50 years after the reburial of Two Moons, only adding to the mystery of the treasure and its location. Later on, Catherine received official approval to unveil the contents of the envelope. 29 years prematurely, however, in 1957, after a story about her findings was published. Though upon her efforts to unveil the mystery, she was unfortunately met with the grueling discovery that the vault had been breached, and the mysterious envelope, as well as a few of the accompanying artifacts, had all but vanished, likely by way of theft. Now, if that's not karma speaking, it sure does add to an already elusive tale. While it is understood that the envelope and its contents were most likely the only hint as to the secret resting place of the treasure of Little Bighorn, the lost Custer treasure, the treasure continues to evade being discovered, and whether the thief had located the treasure or perhaps relocated it, the secret of the treasure of Little Bighorn remains both elusive and worthy of a lost and forgotten treasure. Well, this has been an eye-widening and enthralling story of the lost and forgotten treasure of Little Bighorn. Throughout this divided journey, we are undoubtedly presented with more questions than answers. At the same time, we have been and remain mesmerized by the story. Join me next time for another episode of Lost and Forgotten Treasures. I'm your intrepid storyteller. Lost and Forgotten Treasures is an audiocast written and produced by me, Roger Adams, with the help, of course, from the internet, whose archives from multiple contributors have allowed me to research, interpret, and retell these stories. I hope you've enjoyed traveling with me through time, and whether you found some answers, liberated your ears, or merely just found this story intriguing, I hope you'll join me on the next. For now, keep searching for your treasure, whatever it may be. Until next time.